My name is Abigail Sassano. I'm the owner of the HEART program. The purpose of the HEART program is to end violence in all forms through a paradigm shift. This is part 2 of the video series, The Price of Freedom, called What Responsibility Really Is. I'm excited to talk about this subject because the price of freedom is responsibility. Responsibility is really misunderstood, and the word is used to describe a lot of things that aren't responsibility. On the flip side, if we can have a healthy relationship with responsibility, it will literally determine the quality of our lives. I'm going to revisit some of the concepts I talked about in the first 2 videos, the introduction and part 1, rethinking assumptions and understanding programming. I'm going to bring it together with a personal example. I'm going to talk about what responsibility isn't, and then I'm going to talk about what responsibility is. One of the concepts I talked about in the first video is feedback-informed treatment, an approach to therapy. I'm going to generalize it to relationships in general, and notice that it's feedback-informed, not feedback-directed. A lot of times the feedback that we get isn't accurate, and it's still helpful because it's an opportunity to clarify assumptions that are not correct. The second concept that I talked about is the point of clarity that people that had harmed their family members came to after a process of reflection and dialogue, which was, I didn't know what else to do. And again, this is not a way to excuse or condone people getting hurt, but rather the opposite, to understand how it happens in order to prevent it and stop it from happening. And I think this is really important because I hear people ask that question a lot. What should I do? I don't know what to do. And I want to invite you to make a shift from what should I do to what am I not seeing here? Because when we're seeing a situation clearly, what's needed becomes really clear, and it's almost like we can't stop ourselves from doing it because it's such a natural response. So the awareness that I don't know what to do, it's a good awareness, and it's a good indication that there's some important things about this situation that I'm just not seeing, and I need to take another look. The third concept I talked about is the way that our brain comes up with assumptions to explain situations that we don't understand. And that this isn't a bad thing because there's never a time when we have all the information that we need. So we have to come up with an assumption to guide us in taking a step. And then life gives us feedback about how accurate or inaccurate our assumption was. So the importance is just putting a marker in that assumption and to make sure we remember it is an assumption, to challenge it and update it if it's not accurate. So recently I was talking with a friend who said to me, when you're quiet, I know you're about to say something meaningful. And it got me reflecting on all the other feedback that I've gotten about that same interaction. Some people have told me that they don't think that I want to talk, or that they don't think I like to talk, or that they don't think I want to talk to them, or that I don't trust them. Some people have told me that they think that I'm dishonest. I've had someone tell me, I asked you a question and you hesitated because you were thinking of a lie to tell me. And people have also told me that Um, um, they see me as lacking confidence. You hesitated because you're not confident. Um, and I think the last one has the most like universal um, significance. Um, but I'll get to that. So yeah, so because I really want to honor people's experience with me, um, and what that's like. Um, because like that really hurts to talk to someone that you feel like doesn't want to talk to you. Um, and to say that those explanations really make a lot of sense. They are logical, and that's the benefit of logic is we can always come up with a way to explain things that we don't understand. And then the limitation of logic is that the assumptions we come up with depends in a large way on the information that's available to us. So I can also honor from my experience, what I'm experiencing is, one of my values is that I think that words are really sacred and really powerful. And so um, when people talk, I really want to listen. And listening means that not only am I not talking, but I'm not thinking. um, and then once I hear what the person's saying, then I have to think about it, which also means not talking. And so by the time that whole process, and then getting to responding to what I actually think about what they said, when it comes to that whole process, it usually takes longer than what people expect it to. And then the other part of that is I want to make sure that when I speak, that I'm using words that are accurate to what I think, what I feel, what I believe, and what is happening in this moment. So I find it interesting that especially the part about lack of confidence, because it makes me question, what are we defining as confidence? Um, is it that confidence means moving forward without listening or thinking? Um, and maybe that's an assumption on my part. um, but it certainly would explain a lot of the mayhem that's happening in the world. Because listening and thinking are pretty important. Um, in my point of view, anyways. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about what responsibility isn't. Um, Responsibility isn't burden. A burden is something really heavy that we carry that weighs us down, that really isn't that useful. Um, and it's something that we have to carry because we can't get out of it, and that just makes it all that much heavier because we don't want it. Um, the second thing that responsibility isn't is um, pressure, right? So if burden is something like on top of us that's weighing us down, the other way people talk about responsibility is it's like something that we're pressured to like have control over. Um, you see this a lot of times when people feel responsible for another person. And the way that translates a lot of times is um, feeling responsible to control their behavior and feeling responsible for what they do or don't do. And that's a lot of pressure, and it puts a lot of strain on a relationship, and it's inevitably leads to control, efforts to control, and That's not responsibility. So the third thing that responsibility isn't is blame. And I think that we're actually conditioned to habitually associate the word responsibility with blame. And so when people hear the word responsibility, they think blame. You see that in the statement, like, we're going to find the people responsible for this crime. They're not talking about responsibility, they're talking about blame. We're going to find out who's to blame, and then we're going to punish them, or we're going to get rid of them. And it reminds me of the game that we used to play when we were kids, hot potato. And we would have this potato, and we would pass it around in a circle, pretending it was hot. And we wanted to get it out of our hands. And we would do that while the music played. And then when the music stopped, whoever was left with that hot potato was out. And that's how we treat blame. Whoever happens to have it is out. And the trouble with it is that it doesn't really solve the problem. And in real life scenarios, people are so focused on using their resources to get rid of the potato, getting rid of the blame, that no one is actually thinking about solving the problem. And the problem is that it's arbitrary. Whoever happens to have it at that moment, they're out, just like matter of chance. The other problem with that is that it gives a false impression that one person has the ability to create a problem for an entire group. And that's just not the way that it works, because everybody contributes to whatever is happening. There's plenty of evidence for this. People get fired, get rid of people, and the problem still persists or gets worse because now the people that are left behind are more scared that they'll be the ones left with the blame, and there's less of them, so there's more of a chance that it could fall on them. And still, no one's thinking about how to solve the problem. And I mentioned that it's arbitrary, and in real life situations, it's actually worse than arbitrary, because what tends to happen is that the blame gets placed on the person that actually has the least ability and is in the position where they can least actually make an effective change. So the person that is, running the music, who actually decides when it stops, they don't even touch the potato. They don't even touch it. So there's no chance that they, having the most power in that situation, will be the one with the blame for it. So blame is not responsibility. Blame is a dead end, where the only course of action is getting punished or getting gotten rid of. So, what responsibility is the ability to respond. The ability to respond. The ability to have a response. It's right there in the name, right there in the word. So, first of all, there's a difference between response and reaction. Reaction is based on fear. It's based on impulse, based on instinct. It's not going to have any thought behind it. It's not going to have any take into consideration the actual needs of the situation. And it's like a knee-jerk reaction. Whereas the response takes in the situation, takes in what's actually happening, and offers something that changes what's happening for the better. So that's a response. Responsibility is the ability to respond. So being in a position where I can make a response, meaning that I'm close enough to the situation that I can make a response that changes something. And one of the things that we're the closest to is our thoughts. And a lot of times, responsibility is applied to behavior. You know, we should take responsibility for our behavior. And that's true, but it's also, if we look at the and the level of behavior, it's actually too late. So we want to really make sure that we respond to our thoughts. So, for example, the earlier situation with the person that thought I was being dishonest, you know, with that assumption that they're working with, it really doesn't matter too much um, unless they're willing to challenge that assumption. It doesn't matter too much what they say or do, because however they you know, decide to whatever they decide to say or do is going through that lens of that assumption. So we have the ability to respond to our thoughts. And the other part of response is so there's the being close enough to respond. There's also the presence and the awareness of options and of many different options. So, you know, earlier talking about the statement, I didn't know what to do, I didn't know what else to do. There wasn't anything else I could do. Because in hindsight, there's an awareness, oh, I could have done this or I could have done that, but I didn't see it at the time. And so that's, I think, the toughest part about responsibility. And that's where the price comes in. Because if I look at a situation and I can see my ability to respond that I didn't see at the time, but if I'm going to do things differently in the future, then I'm going to have to see my ability to respond, see it clearly, see the things I could have done and didn't because I didn't see it. And then what comes in then is remorse and sadness. You know, I had the opportunity to do this and I didn't because I couldn't see it at the time. And it's a price. It is a price because it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good, and it's a little bit of a loss and even a grieving, to grieve a lost opportunity that we can now see that we didn't see before. So that's responsibility. The ability to respond to my thoughts, the ability to respond to the situation in front of me with many different options that I can take, and the ability to open myself to see things that I didn't see before. The next video is going to be the what trust really is. Um, and it's really interesting, the relationship between responsibility and trust. Because the more that we take responsibility for ourselves, our lives, our thoughts and actions, um, not blame, but responsibility, the more we take responsibility for our own lives, the more we have a capacity to trust. And so I'm going to be talking about what trust really is, its importance, um, what gets in the way, how it gets damaged, and how it gets repaired.